Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to TV Learning Programs. I'm a grade teacher of Entrepreneurship. Today I'm going to learn with Senior 2 students. And we are still on Unit 5, which is taxes in Rwanda. And our today's lesson, we are going to discuss about the rights and obligations of taxpayers. And I expect you learners, at the end of the lesson, you should be able to explain the rights and obligations of taxpayers in Rwanda. What are rights? We are beginning with the rights. We're going to first discuss about the rights, or talk about the rights of taxpayers. Then later, we shall talk about the obligations of taxpayers. Now, rights are things to be enjoyed by the taxpayer in the process of discharging his or her tax, in the process of paying his or her tax. That is what we call rights. What a taxpayer should enjoy in the process of paying the tax. And one of the rights of the taxpayers, it is the right to privacy, confidentiality. The right to privacy or confidentiality, coming from the word confidential, confidential. The word confidentiality is coming from the word confidential. Now, what does it mean? Confidential is keeping the taxpayer's information secretly. That is the meaning of the word confidential. Now, in this context of taxes, confidential means keeping the taxpayer's information secretly. It means confidential means is keeping the taxpayers, confidential means keeping the taxpayer's information, is keeping the taxpayer's information, secretly. Keeping the taxpayer's information secretly. That is the meaning of the word confidential. The information of the taxpayer should be confidential. A taxpayer enjoys the right of confidentiality. The tax authority should not reveal the information of the taxpayer to another party. If I'm the taxpayer and I'm paying a certain amount of money, that amount should not be known to other taxpayers, should not be known to other people. My information as a taxpayer should not be revealed to other taxpayers, to other parties. Now, one of the rights of a taxpayer has to enjoy the right of confidentiality, where the taxpayer's information has to be kept secretly. It is his or her private information. Other taxpayers should not know the information that is concerned by the taxpayer. That is the first right of a taxpayer. The second right of taxpayers, it is the right to be explained on how taxes are used by the state. A taxpayer should enjoy the right to be explained how taxes are used by the state. And this will encourage taxpayers to pay taxes. As a taxpayer, if I'm paying taxes, I have a right to know the reason. Why do I pay taxes? The taxes that are paid by taxpayers, what are those taxes used for? That amount of money that is paid by the taxpayer as a tax. How does the government use that amount of money that is collected from taxes? Now, taxpayers have a right to know the importance, the reason of paying taxes to the government. The third right of taxpayers, it is the right to tax refund. Right to tax refund. And what is tax refund? What is a tax refund? A tax refund, that is a payment to the taxpayer when he or she pays the amount, when he or she pays more than the amount to be paid. That is a payment to the taxpayer when he or she pays more than the actual amount to be paid. Tax refund, tax refund, tax refund. Tax refund is a payment to the taxpayer when he or she pays more than the amount to be paid. Is a payment, a tax refund is a payment to the taxpayer. 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 Is a payment to the taxpayer when he or she pays more than the actual amount to be paid. To the taxpayer when he or she pays the amount. When he or she pays the amount, when he or she pays the amount, when he or she pays more than the actual amount. When he or she pays more than the actual amount to be paid. 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 That is a tax refund. That is what is meant by a tax refund, or what we call a tax rebate. If we don't call it a tax refund, it is called a tax rebate. Now, with a tax refund is a payment to the taxpayer when he or she pays more than the actual amount to be paid. For example, if I'm a taxpayer, if I'm supposed to pay 10,000 and I pay 15,000, the tax authority will refund me 5,000 because I paid more than the amount that I was supposed to pay. The actual amount that I was supposed to pay to the tax authority, it is 10,000, but I paid 15,000. Now, the 5,000 will be returned to me as a taxpayer because I paid excess amount. That is what we call a tax refund. That is what we call a tax refund. Now, a taxpayer enjoys a right to tax refund. When taxpayers pay the amount that is more than the actual amount that they were supposed to pay, they will be returned back that amount of money. If I was supposed to pay 10,000 and I pay 15,000, meaning the 5,000 will be returned to me as a taxpayer. That is one of the rights that taxpayers enjoy when they are paying taxes. The next right that taxpayers enjoy, it is the right to payment of only the correct amount. The right to payment of only the correct amount of a tax. Taxpayers have a right to declare and pay only the correct amount of a tax due, and in a way that is correct and within the time limits defined by the law. The right to payment of only the correct amount. That is why taxpayers have to declare. To declare, what we call tax declaration, is like you're providing information to the tax authority. Providing information to the tax, you're trying to declare. Now, taxpayers have a right to pay the correct amount of the tax that they are supposed to pay. If I'm supposed to pay 5,000 at the end of the month, that is what I'm supposed to pay. I should pay 5,000. I should enjoy that right of paying the correct amount. That is why taxpayers have to declare in order to pay the correct amount of the tax. The next right that is enjoyed by the taxpayers, it is the right to keep all the original documents concerning his tax obligations, his or her tax obligations. Now, taxpayers have a right to keep their original documents concerning their tax obligations. not the tax authority keeping the original document. Not the tax authority keeping the original document. What the tax authorities will keep the photocopied copy, the documents that have been photocopied. But the original documents that are concerning the tax obligations will be kept by the taxpayer. Now, taxpayers enjoy the right of keeping the original documents, not the tax authority keeping the original documents. Instead, the tax authority will keep the documents that have been photocopied. The next right that taxpayers enjoy when they are paying taxes, it is the right to impartial and fair treatment. Right to impartial and fair treatment. Taxpayers have a right to be treated impartially by the tax authorities without discrimination. Without discrimination. And what is the meaning of the word impartial? The word impartial. What is the meaning of the word impartial? What is the meaning of the word impartial? Taxpayers should enjoy the right of fair treatment or impartiality. Now, the meaning of the word impartial involves not favoring one side or party more than another. Impartial involves not favoring. Impartial involves not favoring. Impartial involves not favoring one side, not favoring one side or party, one side or party more than another, more than another, more than another, more than another. Impartial. There should be fair treatment of the taxpayers. Taxpayers should not be discriminated. Now, the taxpayer should enjoy the right of impartial. They should be treated fairly. They should be treated equally. If taxpayers, they are earning the same amount of money, they should be charged the same amount of a tax. But when they are earning the same amount of money and they are charged different taxes, meaning now there is discrimination of the taxpayers. Taxpayers are being discriminated. Now, as a taxpayer, taxpayers should enjoy the right of impartial. They should be treated fairly by the tax authorities instead of being discriminated. The next right that is enjoyed by the taxpayers, it is the right to courteous service, the right to courteous service. And what is courteous? What is the meaning of the word courteous? The word courteous, it means it is the act of respecting the taxpayers. In this context, the word courteous, 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 courteous, the word courteous. The word courteous means it is the act of showing respect to the taxpayers. Courteous is the act. Courteous is the act of showing, is the act of showing respect, is the act of showing respect to the taxpayers. Courteous is the act of showing respect to the taxpayers. Is the act of showing respect to the taxpayers. Is the act of showing respect to the taxpayers. That is the meaning of the word courteous. Now, taxpayers should be treated with dignity. They should be respected. The tax authorities should respect taxpayers. Now, taxpayers should enjoy the right of courteous. Tax authorities must treat taxpayers with ethics of tax administration and should not take into consideration personal dignity of taxpayers. they should be treated with respect, the taxpayers. If, as a taxpayer, if I'm inquiring information about the tax, the tax authority should explain to me with dignity, with respect, instead of abusing me. Now, when tax authorities are abusing the taxpayers, when they're trying to inquire information about taxes, they're not being treated with dignity. Now, the tax authority should treat taxpayers with dignity, meaning taxpayers should enjoy the right of courteous, being treated with dignity and respect by the tax authorities. The next right, that is, those are the rights that are enjoyed by the taxpayers. Those are the rights that are enjoyed by the taxpayers. Then we have also obligations of taxpayers, the obligations of taxpayers. And what are obligations? What is an obligation? Obligations, these are expectations a taxpayer is supposed to meet in fulfilling tax payment. An obligation. You as a taxpayer, what are you supposed to do when you're fulfilling tax payment? Those are what we call obligations, expectations. What is expected from the taxpayer? What do tax authorities expect from the taxpayer? Those are what we call obligations. What a taxpayer is supposed to do, that is an obligation. And one of the obligations of taxpayers, one of the obligations, it is to register the business in the first 7 days when the activity is created. When the taxpayer, when you start up a business, because you have to pay taxes, according to the business laws, there's what we call a tax law. Now, when you start up a business, you have to pay taxes, and you have to register your business. Now, one of the obligations of the taxpayer, if you have started a business before registration, you have to make sure that you register that business in 7 days. If you don't register that business in 7 days, there will be a penalty. You will be fined. Now, one of the obligations of a taxpayer, when you have created a business before registration, you must make sure that you register that business in 7 days. You should not exceed 7 days so that you can pay taxes. That is one of the obligations of the taxpayer. The second obligation of taxpayers, the obligation of providing accurate information about him or herself. A taxpayer should provide accurate information. And what is accurate information? The information that is accurate. Accurate information. Accurate information. Accurate information. Accurate information. Accurate information. Information that is accurate, it is that information that is exact and true. Information which is exact and true. Accurate information is information that is exact, that is true, that is true, that is true. One of the obligations of taxpayers should provide true information about the activities that they are operating, about the activities that they are running. That is one of the obligations of the taxpayer. A taxpayer should provide accurate information to the tax authority. The next obligation of taxpayers, it is to fill a VAT registration form. It is to fill a VAT registration form for profitable businesses above 5 million. VAT, it should be in capital letters. That was a typing error. Now, a taxpayer should fill a VAT registration form for profitable businesses above 5 million. Like businesses, if you own a business that is earning above 5 million, you should fill what we call a VAT registration form and start paying VAT. You start paying for VAT. And VAT means, VAT in full means value added tax. VAT in full, that is value added tax. Value added tax. That is value added tax. That is VAT in full. Now, for businesses that earn above 5 million, they should fill a VAT registration form and start paying value added tax. Because the meaning of the word VAT is value added tax. Now, like taxpayers who own businesses that earn above 5 million as a profit, they should fill a VAT registration form and start paying for value added tax. That is also one of the obligations of the taxpayers. The next obligation of taxpayers, it is to pay taxes on time. It is to pay taxes on time. Taxpayers should pay taxes on time. They should not exceed the time of payment. As a taxpayer, if I'm supposed to pay on 30th, I should not exceed that date. They should pay taxes on time. They should pay taxes in time. Because instead of paying beyond the time that they are supposed to pay a tax. Because when you exceed the time that you're supposed to pay the tax, you know there is a fine that will be charged. As a taxpayer, you're supposed to pay taxes on time. Because when you exceed the time, you will be charged, you will be fined. You will pay a fine because you exceeded the time of payment. The next obligation of taxpayers, it is to put the tax identification, what we call TIN, on the tax returns. Putting the tax identification. And what is TIN? TIN is that TIN in full means tax identification number. TIN. TIN. TIN means tax identification number. That is the tax identification. That is the tax identification number. TIN, that is the tax identification number. Tax identification number. That is the meaning of the word TIN, tax identification number. Now, when the taxpayer has been refunded a certain amount, you paid more than that, the amount that you paid more than what you're supposed to pay, and you have been refunded, you should put a TIN number in order to be identified. Now, a taxpayer should put a tax identification number on the tax returns. When you have been refunded that amount of money, you should indicate your tax identification number. Because a tax identification number, it is a number that identifies the taxpayer easily. The last obligation of a taxpayer, of taxpayers, it is the obligation to sign the tax returns. Taxpayers should sign the tax returns. If the tax authority pays you back the amount of money, we talked about among the rights of taxpayers, there is what we call a right of tax refund, where you paid back the amount of money. You paid more than the actual amount that you're supposed to pay. When the tax authority pays you back that amount of money, you should sign for those tax returns received, to act as an evidence that you have received that amount of money. Now, as a taxpayer, when you paid back a certain amount of money, when you have been refunded a certain amount of money, you should sign for that amount of money to act as an evidence that you have received that amount of money. Those are the rights and obligations of the taxpayers. Dear learners of Senior 2, before we end our today's lesson, I want to leave you with one question. Homework, and as you're writing down the question, I can read through the question. The question is, explain the rights and obligations of a taxpayer in Rwanda. Let me repeat the question. The question is, explain the rights and obligation of a taxpayer in Rwanda. Thank you, my dear students of Senior 2. Thank you for watching, and thank you for being attentive. We meet next time. Thank you.